The alarm bells were screaming across mining station Delta 7 when the sky caught fire. Hansol dropped his plasma cutter and stared up through the reinforced dome as something massive tore through the orange clouds above Kepler 438b. The object was burning, but not like anything he had ever seen before. Instead of normal fire, it trailed streams of purple and blue energy that twisted and danced like living things. The impact shook the entire colony. Hansol grabbed onto his workbench as tools and equipment crashed to the floor around him. Through the observation windows, he watched the alien ship carve a glowing trench across the industrial district, sending up fountains of molten metal and rock. The vessel finally slammed into the massive pile of processed ore that sat at the edge of the mining complex, burying itself halfway into the artificial mountain. For a moment, everything was silent except for the settling groans of twisted metal and the distant hiss of escaping gases. Then the emergency sirens started wailing, and Hansol could hear the colony administrator shouting orders over the communication system. Security teams were being deployed, medical units were scrambling, and everyone else was being told to stay in their quarters and wait for further instructions. But Yuna was not the type to wait for instructions. The young woman had been working in the lower maintenance tunnels when the crash happened, and she was one of the first people to reach the impact site. While the security guards set up their perimeter barriers and argued about protocols, she grabbed her heavy-duty toolkit and slipped past them. Nobody paid much attention to a maintenance worker carrying tools toward a crash site. Up close, the alien ship was even more incredible than it had looked from a distance. The hull was not made of any metal Yuna recognized. Instead, it seemed to be constructed from some kind of crystalline material that caught and reflected light in impossible ways. Even damaged and partially buried, sections of the hull continued to glow with a soft, pulsing light that reminded her of a heartbeat. She had salvaged hundreds of wrecked ships in her career, from tiny personal shuttles to massive cargo haulers. She knew how to read the signs of structural damage, how to identify which sections were safe to enter, and which ones might collapse at any moment. But this ship followed none of the rules she knew. The crystal hull had cracked in some places, but seemed to have actually grown stronger in others, as if the material could repair itself. Finding an entry point took nearly an hour. The ship's systems were completely alien, with no recognizable doors or hatches. Finally, she discovered a section where the impact had torn away part of the hull, creating an opening just large enough for her to squeeze through. Inside the ship was a maze of corridors that curved and twisted in ways that hurt her brain to follow. The walls glowed with the same soft light as the exterior, providing just enough illumination to see by. Strange symbols flickered across smooth surfaces, and she could hear a low humming sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. She followed the sound deeper into the ship, using her handheld scanner to check for dangerous radiation or toxic gases. The readings were unlike anything in her database, but they did not seem immediately lethal. Her boots crunched on fragments of the crystalline hull material as she made her way through corridors filled with floating debris. The humming grew louder as she approached what she guessed was the ship's central section. When she finally found the source, she stopped and stared in amazement. The creature was enormous, at least 3 meters tall, with a body that seemed to be made of the same translucent crystal as the ship's hull. But where the ship's glow was, steady and calm, the being's light flickered weakly like a candle in the wind. Multiple arms and legs were pinned beneath a collapsed section of the ceiling, and several of his many eyes had gone dark. Despite his alien appearance, Yuna could tell he was in pain. She had seen that same expression on the faces of injured miners after tunnel collapses. Without hesitation, she began setting up her cutting equipment to free him from the debris. As she worked, she became aware that the creature was watching her. His remaining eyes followed her movements with what seemed like curiosity rather than fear. When their eyes met, she felt a strange tingling sensation in her mind, as if someone was gently knocking on a door inside her head. Then she heard his voice, not through her ears but directly in her thoughts. The words formed in her mind like music, beautiful and sad at the same time. After 3 hours of careful cutting and lifting, Yuna finally freed Tarim from the wreckage. The alien guardian was badly hurt, with several deep cracks running through his crystalline body, but he was alive. She helped him to a safer part of the ship where he could rest and begin healing himself through some process she did not understand. While Taerim recovered, Yuna explored the ship's engine room, and what she found there made her head spin. The entire chamber was filled with machinery that defied everything she thought she knew about how things worked. Massive rings of unknown metal rotated slowly in the air without any visible support. Streams of glowing particles flowed through transparent tubes that curved through impossible angles. At the center of it all sat the drive core, a sphere of pure energy that pulsed and writhed like a caged animal. Her instruments went crazy the moment she entered the room. Her radiation detector clicked frantically before shutting down completely. Her electrical scanner showed readings that made no sense, displaying numbers so high they wrapped around to negative values. Even her simple metal detector started beeping at empty air, as if it could sense materials that existed in dimensions she could not see. But despite the chaos of her instruments, Yuna could feel the underlying rhythm of the engine. It was like listening to a song played on instruments she had never heard before. The melody was alien, but melody was still melody. The harmonies were strange, but they still followed patterns she could recognize if she listened carefully enough. She spent hours just watching and listening, trying to understand what each component did and how they all worked together. Slowly, a picture began to form in her mind. The engine was not just broken, it was dying. The exotic matter that powered it was becoming unstable, and without proper containment, it would eventually explode with enough force to vaporize half the planet. The problem was that she had no idea how to fix it. None of her tools were designed for this kind of work. The replacement parts she would need did not exist anywhere in human space. According to every engineering principle she had ever learned, the engine should be impossible to repair without access to the same advanced technology that had built it in the first place. But Yuna had never been the type to give up just because something seemed impossible. She started by studying the damaged components, trying to figure out what each one was supposed to do. The containment field. Generators were easy enough to understand once she realized they worked on the same basic principles as the magnetic bottles used in fusion reactors. The exotic matter injectors were more complex, but they reminded her of the fuel systems used in rocket engines, just scaled up to handle materials that existed in multiple dimensions at once. The real breakthrough came when she realized that the engine's quantum field manipulators were essentially very sophisticated versions of the gravity generators used in mining equipment. She had worked on those systems for years, modifying and upgrading them to handle the unique challenges of asteroid mining. The alien technology was millions of times more advanced, but the basic concepts were the same. That gave her an idea. She left the engine room and began gathering equipment from around the colony. From the mining station, she took a gravity generator that was scheduled for replacement. From the communication array, she salvaged several quantum processors that were used for faster-than-light transmissions. From her own workshop, she grabbed every spare part and tool she could carry. Back in the engine room, she began the most challenging repair job of her life. She carefully removed the damaged components from the alien engine and began replacing them with jury-rigged substitutes built from human technology. A gravity generator became the core of a new containment field system. Quantum processors were rewired to handle exotic matter calculations. Plasma conduits from mining equipment were welded directly to crystalline energy channels. It was like trying to repair a computer with parts from a steam engine, but somehow it worked. The human components were crude and primitive compared to the alien originals, but they could handle the basic functions well enough to keep the engine stable. Her repairs were ugly and inefficient, but they held together. As she worked, Taerim watched from the doorway. His injuries had healed enough for him to move around, and he was amazed by what he was seeing. In 300 years of service as a guardian, he had worked with the finest engineers and technicians from dozens of advanced civilizations. He had seen brilliant minds tackle impossible problems with resources and knowledge that spanned galaxies. But he had never seen anything like this. Yuna was working with tools and materials that his people would have considered barely above stone knives and bearskins. Yet she was achieving results that should have required the most sophisticated technology in the galaxy. She was not just fixing his engine, she was creating entirely new ways for different technologies to work together. When the last connection was finally secured and the engine core stabilized into a steady rhythm, Yun-Ah wiped the sweat from her forehead and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The hybrid system was running smoothly, with human and alien technologies working together in ways that should have been impossible. But her celebration was cut short when she noticed Tae-Rim standing silently in the doorway, his crystalline form pulsing with what she had learned to recognize as deep sadness. She turned off her welding torch and looked at him expectantly. Throughout their time working together, the alien had shared bits and pieces of information about his ship and his mission, but she could sense there was much more he had not told her. Now, with the immediate crisis of the failing engine behind them, it seemed he was finally ready to reveal the whole truth. Tae-Rim moved into the engine room with slow, deliberate steps, his multiple eyes focused on the jury-rigged repairs she had made, and she could feel his amazement through their mental connection. But beneath that amazement was something much deeper and more painful. He began to speak, his voice forming directly in her mind with the musical quality she had grown accustomed to. But this time, there was a weight to his words that made her heart heavy just listening to them. The Velthari, he explained, had been the guardians of this galaxy for over 50,000 years. They were an ancient race, one of the first to achieve faster than light travel and develop the technology needed to protect younger civilizations from the various threats that lurked in the darkness between stars. For millennia, they had maintained a vast network of ships and stations, watching over hundreds of worlds and keeping the peace through a combination of advanced technology and careful diplomacy. But their time was ending. The Velthari had always been a small population, never numbering more than a few million individuals across the entire galaxy. They had long lifespans, sometimes living for thousands of years, but they reproduced slowly and carefully. For most of their history, this had not been a problem. Their advanced technology and superior knowledge had been enough to handle any threats they encountered. But as the centuries passed, they began to face challenges they could not overcome through technology alone. Wars with aggressive species took their toll, claiming the lives of guardians faster than they could be replaced. Ancient diseases that their medical science could not cure began affecting their reproduction rates. Most troubling of all, many young Velthari were choosing not to become guardians at all, preferring to pursue art or philosophy rather than take on the dangerous responsibility of protecting the galaxy. Tae-Rim himself was over 300 years old, considered young by Velthari standards, but he was part of what might be the last generation of guardians. There were fewer than 10,000 of his people left in the entire galaxy, and most of them were already ancient by any reasonable measure. Within another few centuries, maybe less, the Velthari would be gone, and the galaxy would be left unprotected. This was why he had been traveling alone when his ship was damaged. The Velthari no longer had the resources to send multiple ships on patrol missions. Each guardian now covered territory that would have required a dozen ships in the old days. They were spread too thin, trying to maintain their ancient responsibilities, with numbers that grew smaller every year. But there was something else, something that made his situation even more desperate. The Velthari had always believed that only their species possessed the unique combination of technological understanding and moral dedication required to be effective guardians. They had watched other civilizations rise and fall, and while many showed promise in one area or another, none seemed to have both the technical ability and the selfless nature needed to take on the responsibility of protecting others. That was why what Yuna had done was so remarkable. In just a few hours, she had demonstrated both incredible technical skill and a willingness to risk her own safety to help a complete stranger. She had not just repaired his engine, she had created entirely new ways for different technologies to work together. More importantly, she had done it all without asking for anything in return. Her species was young, barely having achieved faster than light travel within the last few centuries. Humans were often chaotic and unpredictable, prone to fighting among themselves and making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. But they also possessed something the Velthari had almost forgotten: the ability to find hope in hopeless situations and to create solutions from nothing more than determination and creativity. Before Tae-Rim could explain more about what this meant for the future, Their conversation was interrupted by the harsh buzz of an emergency communication. Yuna activated her portable comm unit and Han Sol's worried face appeared on the small screen. The news was not good. The colony's long-range sensors had detected multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. The sensor signatures matched known profiles of Korthak's raiders, a particularly nasty group of pirates who specialized in attacking isolated settlements and salvaging advanced technology. Yuna felt her stomach drop as she realized what must have happened. Tayrim's ship had been broadcasting an automatic distress signal when it crashed, a signal that would have been detected by anyone with the right equipment. The Korthaks had obviously been monitoring Guardian communications, waiting for exactly this kind of opportunity. The moment Han Sol's transmission ended, Yuna felt time slow down around her. 6 hours. That was all they had before a fleet of ruthless pirates arrived to claim Tayrim's ship and probably destroy the colony in the process. The Guardian vessel was barely functional, nowhere near ready for combat, and the mining colony had no military defenses whatsoever. But as she looked around the engine room at her hybrid repairs, an idea began forming in her mind. If she could make human and alien technology work together to fix an engine, maybe she could do the same thing to create weapons. She grabbed her toolkit and headed for the door, calling back to Tayrim as she ran. "Work on your ship's weapons, I'll handle the colony's defenses." The alien Guardian watched her go with a mixture of admiration and concern. In his 3 centuries of service, he had seen many brave individuals face impossible odds, but most of them had not survived the experience. Yet something about Yuna's confident determination reminded him of the legendary Guardians from the early days of his people, the ones who had first taken on the responsibility of protecting the galaxy. Yuna's first stop was the mining control center, where she found Han Sol coordinating the evacuation of families and non-essential personnel to the emergency shelters deep underground. The moment he saw her, his face filled with relief. "Thank the stars you're here," he said, pulling up displays showing the approaching enemy fleet. "We've got nothing that can fight ships like these. The best we can do is hide and hope they don't find the shelters." But Yuna was already studying the colony's layout on the central display, her mind racing through possibilities. The mining operation had been built around massive industrial equipment, designed to extract and process ore from the planet's crust. Most of it was purely civilian technology, but with the right modifications, some of it could become very dangerous. She pointed to the array of mining lasers positioned around the main excavation site. "These can cut through solid rock. What do you think they'll do to ship hulls?" Han Sol looked skeptical. "They're not designed for combat. They don't have the range or the targeting systems." "Then we'll give them range and targeting systems," Yuna replied, already moving toward the equipment storage areas. "Help me gather every sensor array, communication relay, and navigation computer we can find." For the next 4 hours, the colony became a hive of frantic activity. While the evacuation continued and Tayrim worked to restore his ship's weapons, Yuna led a team of miners and technicians in the most ambitious engineering project any of them had ever attempted. They repositioned the mining lasers to give them clear lines of fire into space, then networked them together with salvaged computer systems to create a coordinated targeting network. The ore processing facility, which used magnetic accelerators to launch refined metal into orbit for pickup by cargo ships, was reconfigured to fire solid slugs at much higher velocities. The key breakthrough came when she realized that the colony's communication array could be modified to work as a targeting radar. The same systems used to track cargo ships and coordinate mining operations could be reprogrammed to lock onto hostile vessels and guide the improvised weapons to their targets. By the time the Korthak's fleet entered weapons range, Yuna had transformed the peaceful mining colony into a fortress bristling with hidden defenses. From the main control center, she watched the enemy ships approach on her makeshift tactical display, her heart pounding as she waited for the perfect moment to spring her trap. The Korthaks had brought 6 ships, ranging from fast attack craft to a heavy cruiser that served as their flagship. They moved in the confident formation of predators who expected no real resistance. Their intelligence had told them to expect a damaged Guardian vessel and a defenseless human settlement. easy prey that would provide both valuable technology and sport for their crews. They could not have been more wrong. The battle began when the lead Korthax ship moved into range of Itao, the mining lasers. Yuna waited until the entire fleet was committed to their attack run, then activated her weapons network all at once. Beams of coherent light, originally designed to slice through asteroid rock, lanced out from concealed positions around the colony. At the same time, the modified ore launcher began firing metal slugs at a significant fraction of light speed. The projectiles were crude compared to proper military ordnance, but they hit with the force of small nuclear weapons. The Korthax shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and plasma charges, were completely useless against kinetic projectiles, moving at such incredible speeds. The first salvo punched straight through the flagship's defenses and tore massive holes in its hull. Meanwhile, Tayrim had managed to restore partial power to his ship's weapons systems. His particle cannons added their firepower to Yuna's improvised arsenal, creating a devastating crossfire that caught the raiders completely off guard. From her position in the control center, Yuna coordinated the defense with tactical instincts she never knew she possessed. She directed the mining lasers to target the smaller, more maneuverable ships, while the ore launcher focused on the heavier vessels. When the Korthax tried to regroup and coordinate their own attack, she anticipated their movements and had weapons waiting for them. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, 3 of the Korthax ships had been destroyed outright, 2 were crippled and drifting, and the last one was fleeing the system as fast as its damaged engines could carry it. In the silence that followed the battle, Yuna stood in the mining control center, surrounded by displays showing the wreckage of the Korthax fleet. Her improvised weapons had worked better than she had dared to hope, but the victory felt hollow. She knew this was just the beginning. Word of what had happened here would spread, and other raiders would come, drawn by the promise of Guardian technology and the challenge of defeating whoever had destroyed the Korthax. Tayrim found her there, an hour later, his crystalline form now glowing with renewed strength. His ship's self-repair systems had been working steadily, and while it would never be quite the same as before, it was functional enough to return to space. He could leave this world behind, continue his patrol of the outer systems, and pretend that nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and they both knew it. He stood beside her at the observation window, looking out at the stars that were just becoming visible as the planet rotated into night. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The weight of what had just happened and what it meant for the future hung heavy between them. Finally, Tayrim broke the silence. His mental voice was softer than usual, filled with an uncertainty that Yuna had never heard from him before. He told her about the laws of his people, ancient restrictions that had governed the Velthari for thousands of years. Guardian technology was never to be shared with other species. Guardian knowledge was to remain within their bloodlines. Guardian responsibilities were theirs alone to bear. These laws had been created in the early days of their civilization, when they were young and proud and believed they were the only species in the galaxy capable of true wisdom. But now those same laws were becoming the chains that would drag his people into extinction. The Velthari were too few to maintain their ancient duties, too set in their ways to adapt to changing circumstances, too isolated to accept help from others. They were dying not because they lacked the technology to save themselves, but because they lacked the will to change. What Yuna had accomplished in the past few days had shattered everything Tayrim thought he knew about his people's role in the galaxy. She had demonstrated technical skills that rivaled the greatest Velthari engineers, tactical abilities that would have impressed their military commanders, and moral courage that exceeded even the legends of their greatest heroes. More than that, she had done it all while working with inferior equipment and no formal training. The Velthari had spent millennia looking down on younger species, dismissing them as primitive and chaotic. But chaos, Tayrim was beginning to realize, might be exactly what the galaxy needed. The ability to think outside established patterns, to find solutions that no one else had considered, to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. These were not flaws to be corrected, but strengths to be embraced. He turned to face Yuna directly, his multiple eyes focusing on her with an intensity that made her feel as if he was looking directly into her soul. What he was about to offer her had never been offered to anyone outside his species before. It went against everything his people believed, violated laws that had existed since before humans had even discovered fire. But his people were dying, and the galaxy still needed guardians. Yuna listened as he explained what becoming a guardian would mean. The bioenhancement process would change her at the cellular level, extending her lifespan to match that of the Velthari and giving her access to their advanced technology. She would gain the ability to interface directly with Guardian systems to command their ships and weapons as naturally as she now used her own tools. But more than that, she would inherit the responsibility that came with such power. She would become one of the protectors of countless worlds, sworn to defend civilizations she had never seen against threats she could barely imagine. It would mean leaving her old life behind, accepting dangers that would make today's battle seem like a minor skirmish. The choice was hers, but she had to make it now. His ship was ready to depart, and if she was going to accept his offer, the enhancement process needed to begin immediately. The biotechnology required to make the transformation was complex and delicate, and it could only be performed aboard a Guardian vessel with access to the full medical database of the Velthari. Yuna walked to the window and pressed her palm against the cool surface. Looking out at the colony she had just saved, she could see lights in the residential areas where families were emerging from the emergency shelters, returning to homes they had feared they might never see again. Han Sol was down there somewhere, probably coordinating the cleanup efforts and making sure everyone was accounted for. These people had trusted her with their lives and she had not let them down. But how many other settlements were out there, scattered across the galaxy, facing similar threats with no one to protect them? How many colonists were looking up at the stars right now, wondering if tomorrow would bring raiders or monsters or any of the other horrors that lurked in the darkness between worlds? She thought about her life on this remote mining world, the comfortable routine of maintaining equipment and solving technical problems. It was a good life, a safe life. But was it enough? Could she really go back to fixing mining lasers and ore processors knowing that there were entire civilizations depending on guardians who might not be there when they were needed? The answer came to her with surprising clarity. She had always been drawn to challenges that others considered impossible, had always felt most alive when she was pushing the boundaries of what could be accomplished with determination and creativity. What greater challenge could there be than protecting an entire galaxy? But there was one question she had to ask first, one fear that she needed Tayrim to address before she could make her final decision. She turned back to him, meeting his alien gaze with steady eyes. What would happen to her humanity in this process? Would she still be Yuna, the mechanic from a mining colony who had learned to make impossible things work? Or would she become something else entirely, losing herself in the vastness of guardian knowledge and responsibility? Tayrim's response surprised her. The enhancement process would change her body but not her mind, would give her new abilities, but not take away the qualities that made her unique. In fact, those very human qualities, the creativity, the adaptability, the refusal to accept that something was impossible, were exactly what the galaxy needed from its guardians. The Velthari had become too rigid in their thinking, too locked into ancient patterns to deal with new threats. But humanity was young and chaotic and unpredictable, full of individuals who could find solutions that no one else had even considered. That was not a flaw to be corrected, but a strength to be preserved. As the bioenhancement process began, in the medical bay of the Guardian ship, Yuna felt her body changing in ways she could never have imagined, but her mind remained her own, filled with the same determination and curiosity that had driven her to fix an alien engine with mining equipment and turn a peaceful colony into a fortress. News of humanity's first guardian spread quickly through the networks of communication that connected the civilized galaxy. The young species that many had dismissed as too primitive to matter had produced someone worthy of joining the ancient protectors. It was the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history, one that would be written by beings who had learned that the impossible was just another word for untried.